Everyone, welcome back to Teen 1D. And in this video, we're going to be talking about insulin pumps versus injections and which one's better for a diabetic. So we're going to be looking at the whole entire lifestyle and then all the benefits and all the pros and cons of having a pump versus injections. So yeah, and I'm going to be giving my own experiences and also kind of advice for like everyone in general. So first, to start with injections. So some of the pros are that some of the actually I think the biggest pro is that you're not attached to anything, and this is like a pretty big thing for a lot of people, and it's kind of a deciding factor for a lot of people as well. A lot of people don't really like want to be attached to something, especially like the tubing of pumps make it kind of annoying. It gets like it can get caught up in places. It can be really annoying to like deal with a pump, especially if it's tubed. Even if it's not tubed, like the Omnipod, like I have the Omnipod 5, it's still sometimes a bit annoying to deal with because you always have something attached to your body, and it's quite bulky as well. It's not like very like slick. Like okay, like maybe like Dexcom G7 or CGM or whatever. It's not that big of a deal because it's really slim. It's really small. You barely notice it, but the pumps, all the pumps on the market currently, even the tubeless ones like Omnipod, they're still pretty noticeable and they're still pretty bulky, and they can still get caught up in things, and it's also annoying if they're like ripped off, etc. All that stuff. So yeah, the biggest pro probably is and the deciding factor for a lot of people and why they choose to not have pumps and to instead inject is because there's no tubing, there's no devices, there's nothing on your body. Also, tying to this, it feels more free. Like you don't have to carry a pump around, and biggest of all, you don't have to worry about like changing your pod pump every 2-3 days. You don't have to worry about like your pump failing. A lot of times, for example, on your pod, like I don't know, you're in school or you're outside, you're like in public, and then it like an error happens and it starts like beeping like crazy and stuff. It starts like alarm goes off, and you can't really turn it off until you go like manually into the app and like cancel the pod, and it takes and there's a couple minutes of where it just the pod just like makes a really like loud noise for a long time, so it's kind of like disturbing and annoying at times. So not having to worry about that, and also not having to worry about like changing your pod site every 2 to 3 days, and thinking about like it's kind of another stressor. I know like you're already worrying about like a bunch of stuff like your CGM, your blood sugar readings, but this kind of adds like another stressor about like site changes. Where should I put it next? I don't know. Like I have a pod site tracker and like a Google Sheets site where I like track where to put my pod next and like all the sites I've put, along with like every single like I guess every single how long each pod site lasted. And having this is kind of like I mean it's good, but it's kind of another stressor, and it's more effort and into that diabetes that you put. Also, it's less visible not having injections. If you're worried about like people seeing it, people won't see anything. I know this is a worry for some people, especially my age. And it's also sometimes less expensive. If you have an insurance that covers the pump cost, it is less expensive to get a pump. But a lot of people don't have this, and if you don't have it, then it's much more expensive to have a pump. Like for example, each pump costs like a lot of money, so you're gonna be paying constantly every 3 days. You're gonna be paying that money instead of just buying insulin and injecting because needles don't really cost a lot of money. Alright, and the cons are, however, there are some cons. They have to take shots several times a day. This is like one of the biggest cons. And so every single time you have before meal, you have to take a shot. It's bolus before meal, and even if you do not even without meals, even like for like snacks, and pretty much every time you eat something, you have to give yourself a needle. You also have to give yourself a needle of long-acting insulin shots at night, and sometimes even during the day as well, like in the morning. And also, it's harder to adjust doses quickly. You can't just pause your basal insulin if you're going low. You can't just like, stop giving yourself insulin. You have to like, you have to worry about kind of injecting yourself because you can't just inject yourself all the time, right? But also, you can't. Sometimes you have to inject yourself. Like sometimes you have to give yourself insulin multiple times like in a row. So, yeah, it might get annoying to have to take several shots and time that. Also, your blood sugar might spike more often, and it might be a bit harder to regulate your blood sugar. For example, your blood sugar is rising, and then if you have a pump, you can just bolus 2 units. It goes up 200. You bolus one more unit. It goes up 250. You bolus more units. But then for the shots, it's kind of like, oh, you bolus like 4 units at once, or you bolus 1 unit and then it goes all the way up, and then yeah, so it might the dosing and timing is much harder to get correct if you're on needle. And a lot of people also become like, I guess it's kind of more effort to needle yourself, and it's also scarier than just to click a number into your pod and just hit enter. So a lot of people just kind of get lazy, and it's harder for you to control your blood sugar sometimes for some people if you're using a needle versus a pump. As in a pump, you can just add a number and just click enter versus actually administering stun through a needle. Now let's get to pumps. What I personally like about them is that some pros are that there's really precise control, and you can like control off a lot of things, especially if you're like modifying it and adding your own thing and not using the Omnipod algorithm or whatever algorithm it has. So you can adjust things like by hour. You have a lot of freedom. You can actually make it do a lot of things for you. Even the automated mode, it's doing a lot of stuff for you, even though it's not like as good or as much customization as you can have if you like modify yourself. But it's still, even that is more than the amount of control you have over what's going on and insulin being administered compared to injections. As yeah, it's like automatic. A lot of things happen automatically, so you don't have to like inject basal yourself and like have to time the basal, I guess, and because it does it itself. Also, it's super easy to get bolus. You just put out a few numbers, type enter, and boom, you're done. You don't have to be worried about like bolusing and like needling, because you just like click a few buttons, you're good. Also, mini pumps also communicate with CGMs, and so that's a really big plus, especially now, because since they talk to each other, it's kind of like they can adjust insulin automatically. You don't have to like rely on yourself on like, oh, what's my blood sugar measurement? I have to check my blood sugar, and then I have to bolus accordingly. It does all that by itself. Also, the built-in bolus calculator is really helpful, and the correction calculator is also helpful, as it can automatically kind of like say how much you should give, how much insulin you should give. However, sometimes you have to adjust it yourself, because sometimes it says like too little than than what you should give. Like it recommends too little insulin. This happens to me often when it's high. So yeah, for me personally, I'm gonna give my own insight. Using a pump is also much easier to have a higher time range. Like having a 90% or more with the pump time and range is quite easy. Like almost every single time I use a pump, like every single month, I have 90 or more time and range with a pump. However, with injections, I feel like it's harder to have a 90% time and range or more. It's still it's still doable to have like 80% or even 90%. I was just saying it's just harder to have that percentage time range with a pump. However, there are also some cons with pump. So you're always gonna be wearing something. It's not gonna be sleek like the injections. It might feel annoying or get in your way. Also, there can be rashes that happen with pumps as well. Me personally, I haven't had anything happen, but I know some people who have experienced rashes through the adhesive with a pump. So if you have that, especially if it's a really bad rash, that could definitely be a decisive factor on if you shouldn't use a pump. Also, side changes can be a hassle. It's like an added stressor, like I mentioned earlier. And some tech issues happen, like pump failures, and it can lead to like burnouts as well. Not that this doesn't happen in general, but like it adds a new stressor which can lead to burnouts. My overall take is that if you like the freedom of not using a pump, like if you value greatly the freedom of not having a pump and not having that bother, and also don't mind injecting yourself multiple times a day, and don't mind kind of like and you think that you can be on top of yourself when you are not using a pump, then I would go with injections. But if you are really like if you really want to have a good time and range without maybe being so on top of it, and kind of letting the pump do a lot of stuff for you, while also like of course like adjusting it because the pump isn't perfect, and if you don't really mind that much about like the pump or the tubing and stuff, then I would definitely go with the pump, as I noticed that your time and range definitely is higher, and it's easier to have a higher time and range with the pump. So if freedom and flexibility matters a lot for you, then if the device bugs you, then, or if you have a rash, then the injections might be a better fit. But if you care about your time range and your blood sugar control more, then I would go with the pump. That's my overall take.